So in a previous video I broke down who would be my dream back three for Manchester United come the 27-28 season. If you haven't seen it, I'll leave it linked in the eye above. But in that video I discussed that while I do see Lenny Yoro being Manchester United's long-term central centre-back, playing a kind of sweeper-like role, I do think United should consider signing a player who is more of a hybrid between a centre-back and a defensive-minded midfielder, who could play a more adventurous role at the heart of the back three. Now in this video I'm going to be answering these questions. What is the tactical importance of a libero, and what would an elite level libero do for Amorim's system, before coming on to who would be my main target for this role by the 27-28 season, and then coming on to a greater point analysing are liberos born or made? A question I'm going to be answering by looking back at some of the best examples of liberos throughout history. But first of all, to show you I'm not overstating the value of a libero, before I go into the finer detail of what a libero is, let me show you this clip from the Real Madrid-Manchester City Champions League game, and you'll see how John Stones' tactical IQ, which Guardiola has built in over the years, alongside his technical ability, awareness and athleticism, all work to allow City to play through an intense press and exploit the space in behind. Now I should say that out of possession Stones doesn't really play like a traditional libero centre-back, as in this clip he was being used in the midfield line out of possession in the double pivot, but in possession he pretty much plays how Amorim's libero in the back three is expected to play. So here we see John Stones is in the midfield double pivot alongside Bernardo Silva, which is a different position to the one our libero would take up, which would be deeper in the back line in a 5-2-3. Real Madrid have possession in the middle third, and you can see that City are doing an excellent job of positionally cutting the passing lanes, with Haaland goal side of Camavinga, Stones cutting the pass into Vinicius' feet, with Foden and Stones also in close proximity to Mbappe sitting in the half space. Real look for a long ball forward and it ends up with Ederson, and now you can see that Real Madrid have four players caught high up the pitch, but this is where the intelligence of a libero like John Stones comes into play, as while some teams would want their keeper to throw the ball into Stones and for him to then drive forward and take advantage of that space, Stones is highly tuned to what Pep wants his City possession strategy to be, as well as the current game state, and so when Ederson throws the ball into his path, he doesn't take the opportunity to turn and drive into the space. Instead he looks to initiate a more patient possession strategy, which actually allows Real Madrid to get back into their defensive shape, with Stones even having the composure to hold on to the ball with his back to goal and draw Mbappe into him by standing statically. And this is for two main reasons. Firstly, City can get into position in order to orchestrate one of Pep's coordinated patterns of play, but Stones also does this so that when he plays a pass into Ake, Mbappe is further away, and so Ake has more space and time. But Stones' role as the orchestrator in this build-up pattern doesn't stop there, as his main role becomes to open up passing lanes by dropping into the space between two Real Madrid players, opening up that passing lane and allowing City to split them. He does it here, reacting very quickly and having the intensity in his movement in order to drop quickly and open up the passing lane for Ederson, as City also invert Rico Lewis in from the right side, giving them this condensed pentagon shape in a 3-2 setup that we are familiar with. Ederson circulates the ball out to Bernardo Silva, and now once again Stones is quick to react and read the game, dropping into the space between Mbappe and Rodrigo, which works to open up the passing lane for Bernardo Silva, wherefrom he could play the early pass to split Rodrigo and Mbappe straight away, but instead he takes a few extra touches, drawing them in. But once again we see the intelligence of Stones as he's able to read the situation and recalibrate his position in order to open up that passing lane, and even though Bernardo Silva's pass is slightly overhit, Stones turns a potential error into a positive, as this overhit pass draws Camavinga in. Stones' athleticism across the ground and long legs enable him to get to the ball before Camavinga, and now you can see the pitch has opened up for City, as Guardiola, who has drifted wide of Camavinga, is now able to receive the ball and find Kevin De Bruyne in the half space on the right side, wide of Ceballos, who's had to move over, setting De Bruyne up to drive into the Real Madrid half. But this was only possible because of Stones' initial intelligence to slow down the pace of the game, and then his reading of the game to be able to make movements to open up passing lanes in a way that I think Amorim's possession system desperately lacks. But before I go any further, a quick reminder, I do have a Patreon where for $1.50 a month you can read some of my articles. I've got one on Jose Mourinho prior to his time at Porto, the Juventus doping scandal, one on Luis Campos at Monaco, and another on Beppe Marotta at Sampdoria, and I'm also working on one looking at Nigerian football, the problems and the solutions. And if you do have any other ideas for articles, you can let me know in the in-game Instagram group chat, which you can get access to for $5 a month, with in-game discussions throughout all the Manchester United games. And when I do release my ebook, you will get that for free as well. So I'll leave that linked in all the usual places, the eye above, description, comment section, and on the end screen after the video. And so in the central centre-back position, you can now see how having a player who is more of a midfielder in that libero role would be beneficial, especially when playing out during the building ability is also going to be valuable further up the pitch in the middle third as well, with the central centre-back, just like Maguire does currently, able to switch play with longer passes, thread passes splitting the opposition midfield into players' position between the lines, and also driving into the space themselves when it opens up as well. And there are very few centre-backs who possess these qualities, alongside the press resistance needed in the build-up phase, and the overall defensive, aerial and athletic qualities as well. Now with Leny Yoro playing more of a sweeper role in the back three, you probably wouldn't want to bring in an orthodox centre-back to challenge him for that role, but instead someone who is more of a hybrid between a defensive-minded midfielder and a centre-back who can play both in a back three and a midfield double pivot. But these players are incredibly rare. However, there are 3 players who would be on my shortlist. The first is Tchouaméni, but even in 2027, unless Real Madrid signs someone like Saliba and it displaces him, is kind of similar to the Arejo transfer, where you'd probably just have to wait and see if he does become available rather than banking on actually targeting him. Another option would be Boubacar Kamara at Aston Villa, who like Tchouaméni has played frequently as both a centre-back and a ball-winning midfielder over the last few seasons, and from a stylistic point of view I think he'd be perfect for that libero role in a back three. Kamara was someone I actually suggested United sign in central midfield around this time last season, before he picked up that long-term injury, and assuming he does get back to his level of 2023, which he has shown this season, and is still at that level either in 2026 or 2027, he'd be another that would be on my shortlist for the long term. But there is another player who I think is going massively under the radar, who I think could develop into a better player than Kamara, certainly in possession, and that is Chelsea's 20-year-old Leslie Ugachukwu, who is currently on loan at Southampton and has been very impressive for them this season. Aesthetically, his tall frame and long legs does make him very similar to Amadou Onana, who was actually my first choice ahead of Agate in the summer, and he is also someone that, due to his aerial ability, physicality and athleticism, could also be moulded into playing as a libero in a back three whilst also playing as a ball winner in the midfield double pivot. However, I think Ugachukwu's potential might be even higher than his, as in possession he has the sort of fluidity in his movement and ability to break lines with his midfield splitting passes that we see from someone like Romeo Lavia. Maybe not to his level just yet, but he certainly isn't someone who you'd classify as a sole destructive midfielder, as you could definitely say with Agate. But it's his athleticism and physicality which really sells me on him though, as like Onana, the 20-year-old is a fantastic recovery tackler, able to race back and eat up the ground on an opposition player, carrying the ball forward, wrapping his long legs around the player and the ball and making sliding tackles from unorthodox positions in order to stop the attack in its tracks. And this athleticism and defensive capabilities combined with his height and physicality makes him exactly the right profile of central midfielder who could drop back into the back line, as aerially he would definitely suit this role, as over the past 365 days, when compared against every other midfielder in Europe's top 5 leagues, he's ranking in the 90th percentile for the percentage of aerial duels he has won, which alongside his high volume of tackles and dribblers challenged, makes him someone that I think already has the underlying attributes to play as a libero, whilst also being able to play in his natural role as a ball-winning midfielder in the midfield line as well. Now as of yet, his reading of the game does have to be improved, as he doesn't have the anticipation of someone like Agate to almost be a second ahead of play and be able to jump in and make interceptions, as seen by his low interceptions rate. But given that he does have the pace to sit behind the wider 2 centre-backs in the back three as they push up onto the players in the half space, leaving Ugachukwu to sit deeper and sweep up in behind, I don't see his front foot defending being as much of an issue as it would be if he was playing as a wider centre-back. But what really sells me on Ugachukwu as a libero alternative during certain games to Yoro is his ball carrying and his dribbling, as for a player of his size, he's incredibly fluid when turning, and with him ranking in the mid to high 90th percentiles for the volume of successful take-ons he completes, the percentage of those take-ons he completes as well, and these carries into the penalty area, with his progressive carries also ranking in the 83rd percentile as well, he definitely has the ability to progress the ball forward on his own, that's going to enable him to swivel and turn out of pressure before driving into the space, and so he'd be more than capable of receiving the ball with his back to goal, under pressure on the edge of his own box, driving through the centre of the pitch on the transition, or exploiting the space in the middle third against a deeper defensive block by carrying the ball past the opposition's forward and midfield line. And so as a more realistic and cheaper Tchouaméni alternative, Ugachukwu would definitely be someone I'll be keeping my eye on, both this summer and next, being someone that I'd even prefer over Kamara, as I think the Chelsea loanee has elite level potential. And also, given that Chelsea paid £23 million for him, even a relatively affordable fee of between £30 to £35 million would be a decent amount of profit for them. And given their other options in central midfield, I could definitely see Ugachukwu moving as early as this summer. But now we move on to some historical examples of how a libero was used in a back three. So when Antonio Conte arrived at Chelsea back in 2016, he inherited a team in disarray. Chelsea had finished in 10th in the Premier League the previous season, their worst performance in 2 decades, and Conte's solution was radical. In the first few games of the season he tried with a 4-3-3, but when it was clear that players like Kante just didn't suit his midfield setup, he shifted to a 3-4-3 system, with David Luiz coming in as a libero in the back three. Luiz was a player who was often criticised for his erratic defending, but who also had immense quality in possession, and he was deployed as a central figure in the defence. Whilst also in possession, he was the initiator of attacks with his exceptional passing range for Chelsea. In this setup, Luiz was flanked by 2 more conservative defenders in Cesar Azpilicueta from the right and Gary Cahill from the left, who provided the cover which gave Luiz more freedom. Both Alonso and Victor Moses were a hallmark of Chelsea's play that season. Now, Conte's use of Luiz as a libero was not exactly a direct replication of the Beckenbauer archetype. Instead, it was a modern interpretation, tailored to the Brazilian strengths. Luiz was less of a sweeper and more like a deeper line playmaker, using his vision and technical ability to deal attacks as it was about stopping them. But another example of a libero in a back three comes a few decades before, and that's Louis van Gaal's use of Frank Rijkaard. Long before Conte's experiment with David Luiz, Louis van Gaal was redefining the libero role in his own way. At Ajax in the early 1990s, Van Gaal deployed Frank Rijkaard as a hybrid between a centre-back and a defensive-minded midfielder. Rijkaard, a player of immense intelligence and composure, was tasked with shielding the defence whilst also orchestrating play from deep. Van Gaal's Ajax system is best described as a fluid 3-4-3 diamond, with Rijkaard pushing forward from the centre-back position in possession and operating as the side's deepest midfielder. Now, unlike the traditional libero who starts in the defence and pushes out, Rijkaard was often dropping back from midfield to collect the ball, acting as a pivot between the defence and the attack, and his positional awareness and ability to read the game allowed him to break up opposition play, pushing out in front of the back line, and in possession he was the main distributor with the ball, using his line breaking passes and his ball carrying from deep in order to progress the ball forward. Rijkaard's role was pivotal in Ajax's total football philosophy, which emphasised positional interchange and fluidity. When Ajax were on the attack, Rijkaard would often step into the back line, providing the defensive security to allow one of the fullbacks to push further forward. Out of possession, if Ajax were pressing aggressively, he could push further forward into the midfield, or drop back into the back line to create a back four, depending on what the situation needed. And so Rijkaard's fluidity both in and out of possession made Ajax incredibly difficult to press, but also made their press a lot more effective and allowed them to dominate possession and control the game. Now, at first glance, Luiz and Rijkaard would seem like polar opposites. Luiz, with his flamboyant style and attacking instincts, was a risk taker. Rijkaard, on the other hand, was the epitome of calm and control, a player who prioritised discipline and structure, yet both players were used as liberos in their respective systems that demanded both defensive solidity and creative passes, with his long passes and willingness to carry the ball forward, while Rijkaard relied on short, incisive passing and his positional intelligence. But crucially, both players were given the freedom in their roles due to the defensive solidity of the system around them. Conte's Chelsea was primarily a counter-attacking team relying on quick transitions and a structured defensive setup, and Luiz's role was to push out and disrupt opposition play when they received the ball in front of the back line. Whilst in possession, he would launch attacks with his long-range passing. Van Gaal's Ajax, by contrast, was a possession-based side, and Rijkaard's role was to maintain control and dictate the tempo. And so when Ugachukwu is used as a central centre-back as an alternative to Yoro, his role is going to be more akin to Rijkaard, where he's expected to sit at the top of the box during the build-up phase and aid United in playing out of pressure with quick 1 and 2 touch bounce passes around the press, as well as being able to use his press resistance, fluid movement and ball carrying ability to be able to drive forward, carrying the ball powerfully into the space in behind the opposition's midfield line press. Higher up the pitch in possession in the middle third, he's going to be sitting as the deepest player in the possession shape, and so he's going to need to find those line breaking passes through the centre, but also, like David Luiz, be able to switch play directly out to the wing backs and over the top of the back line as well, which I think is definitely a part of his game that he can improve significantly over the next few years. And so if United could pick him up either in 2025 or 2026 for around £30 to £40 million, I think Ugachukwa's skill set, particularly his aerial ability, his physicality and athleticism, alongside all the other attributes I've mentioned, makes him the perfect player who can be used either as a ball winner in midfield or also as a libero in the back three. So let me know what you think of Ugachukwa and any other player you think could play that hybrid role as a libero but also as a ball winner in central midfield. And if you do want to sign up to my Patreon to get access to the in-game Instagram group chat or read any of my articles, I'll leave it on the end screen now.